Hello and welcome to another episode of the Get Psyched Show. This week I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Claire Cruikshank. Claire is currently the head of performance for the University of Edinburgh's women's rugby team. We chat through the journey into her current role, working with students, the sports psychology department, and how best to support the development of young players. Additionally, Claire has spent time coaching in Sweden and recently had great success with Edinburgh Rugby and the national side at the World Cup. I hope you enjoy it and let me know what you think. Thanks. Hi Claire, thank you for joining us today. How are you? How are you keeping?
Thanks, George. Yeah, and I'm really good. It's good to be involved on your podcast.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, really glad to have you on, and we've got a few topics we'd like to cover today and chat about with your experience, especially in rugby. So, could you, to start off with, give us a bit of a brief career overview of, I guess, from leaving school and then what you've been involved in since then up until to the present day where you're coaching now?
Yeah, I left school and I wanted to be a teacher. So I applied to do teaching degrees. I didn't actually get into the teaching degree, so I ended up going down the sport development and coaching route. So I went to Newcastle, I went to Northumbria University, and that's where I actually took up playing rugby. Back when I was at university, in school, you didn't get to play rugby as a female, so it was a new opportunity. So I went through that and got my degree, did a bit of travelling. I went to Australia, I spent a bit of time out there, and then came back and worked in sport development. So I started working in sport development really after a little bit of admin experience for Edinburgh University. So I started working there about 16 years ago. So started in sport development at the university, and then progressed to a few different roles there where I oversaw the running of the sports union. So the 60, at the time 62 clubs, I think it was. And then I had a little spell as the head of performance sport at the university as well for about 8 years. And it was at that time I was still coaching the university team, so I started coaching there. And now that's my full time job is to be the head of performance for the women's rugby program at Edinburgh University. So I'm one of the very few, definitely female coaches and coaches around the UK who get to call coaching my full time role. So yeah, I'm really fortunate the way things transpired, but it's a super exciting job and I love what I do.
Yeah, excellent. And I think the example of Edinburgh University, the women's team and setup there is something quite unique in the UK at the moment. It's sort of one of the first, I guess, not professional, but almost heading that way, female rugby setups, and it's really good to see. For your own, we're going to come on to that in a second, but for your own sort of rugby experience, you said you got involved when you went down to university. What were your sort of first experiences, and how did you get involved, and then end up making a few international appearances as well?
Yeah, I grew up down in the Scottish borders, and obviously rugby's huge down there. But at the time, girls rugby wasn't really a thing. So we all played hockey at school. But I had a younger brother, so we used to muck around in the garden. So I'd played a little bit. There was a couple of girls I played hockey with who were playing up in Edinburgh. So when I went to university, it just seemed like an ideal opportunity to try something different. I played hockey pretty much all my life. I've still really enjoyed hockey, and for the first little while, I crossed over playing hockey and rugby. But it just seemed like something new, different experience. It was the first real opportunity on my doorstep to try it out. So yeah, I tried it at university. For maybe the first year, I tried to balance playing hockey and rugby. But then I got involved in, at the time, the Scottish Exiles route, and then got picked up quicker than I probably envisaged by Scotland. And that's where I shifted my focus from hockey to rugby. And yeah, I was lucky enough to get a few caps, and maybe not as many as I'd hoped from injury, but it was still a unique and an amazing experience.
Yeah, excellent. And I think even nowadays it's the case where a lot of female players may have done a lot of sports, where hockey's a good example, netball as well, throughout high school, and then they get to university and it might be their first experience, like yourself, of rugby, and those transferable skills of just having good hand-eye coordination, movement can so easily be put into rugby context. So players can thrive with very little experience in the game. So yeah, it's good to hear, and I'm sure your story isn't a unique one. There's a lot of players that come into the game late. I guess sticking on that university theme, coming on to your current role now as head of performance for the women's rugby at Edinburgh University, could you just explain a bit more about what that role includes? Because often you hear maybe a head coach role and it's very clear what sort of your responsibilities are, but a head of performance maybe entails a little bit more. So could you explain sort of what that role is?
Yeah, so ultimately, my kind of bread and butter is the coaching of our women's first 15. So I head up the coaching program for that program, but alongside that, there is a lot of sort of strategic overview in terms of how, like what we spoke about, how we can get girls playing rugby as well. So overseeing our second team and down to essentially our third team on that. A lot of liaison with the support services, so working very closely with our S&C team, our medical team, our sports psychology team as well, nutrition, to provide a program that allows aspiring female rugby players to stay in Scotland because there's obviously some real cool things down south to get a world class education and kind of get that dual career. So a lot of it is around putting programs in place, and the program for one player might not necessarily be identical to another player because within the our first 15 we've got players who are playing international rugby and players who are playing for Scotland, and then we've got players who may have come up through our system. So we've got one girl in our first at the moment who's come from starting rugby at university, and she's now playing first 15. So their motivations and their wants and needs from the program are different, but the basis is still the same in terms of what we're looking to provide them. We provide them with their strength and conditioning, their medical support, quality coaching, and with the Bucks Women's National League, a real high quality competition where they can play against internationals on a week in week out basis.
Yeah, excellent. I'd like to ask a wee bit more about sort of the player and I guess when you're working with students as well, the approach is maybe a little bit different. But just first on your role as well, LinkedIn's great because I was able to have a wee nosy sort of through the things you've been involved in the past, and I see you've sort of obviously the international experience, but as well in sports development and even anti-doping. Does that sort of rounded approach of lots of different segments of sport, did that help in coming into this role because you've got an understanding and sort of get the balance that you need to have between the S&C, the sports psychology, the nutrition? Did that really help sort of give you the skills to be in this role?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's so multifaceted now, a performance environment or even a club environment, there's so many different things you have to take into account. One of the fortunate things from the university role is that everyone's students. So, the lifestyle is similar. It's different, depends on what degree they're doing. Some degrees are full on, Monday to Friday, 8 till 6, 9 till 5. Others are a little bit more sporadic in what the commitment is for the students. But having that experience just allows you to work with the players. Probably one of the biggest or the two biggest experiences will have been my sport development. So how do we get grassroots players involved? How do we create plans? How do we, look at individual development plans and club development plans? And then my experience as the head of performance for Edinburgh University. So that was very much looking overseeing all our performance sports. So learning and using different experiences from it that I picked up from some of the other coaches. So what I learned from maybe our swim coaches or our rowing coaches or our netball coach, and how can I use that in a rugby sense in terms of the structures, the systems, and how we help young aspiring players through what can be certainly when they start university a quite a stressful time. Just moving away from home, learning to live independently. Simple things like that sometimes we all take for granted now, but things like how to cook, um, you know, how to cook on a budget. Things like that are all really valuable things that we have to try and help these players navigate through.
Yeah, definitely. It's such a key time, that sort of maybe 18 to 22-year old stage, and there's research that shows as well that it's one of our biggest development stages in our brain as well, to sort of put the building blocks into place for once you sort of hit 25 and afterwards, when we get into our maybe full-time or more secure jobs, that those blocks have been built during that university sort of age range. I really like how you talked about taking sort of skills and ideas from coaches in other sports as well. From just a personal point of view with coaching, I see a big problem, especially in young people, with the technique in running, and it translates across football, rugby, every sport. Is a lot of
Yeah.
people are never really taught how to run. So getting sort of an athletic specialist, someone who's sort of knows in and out, to come in, do a bit of session, do a bit of work on that, can have a massive improvement. So have you got sort of examples, whether it's very coaching specific or maybe more performance specific, where you've come into this role and you've gone, right, I've seen this before, or I'm going to make a key change here to try and help develop and improve our performance?
Um, I guess with the role, one of the key things when I started was around how we create an environment and a place where people want to be. Everyone who comes to the rugby loves the sport, but what we ended up asking the players to do was you're essentially becoming nearly professional in terms of the amount of hours in the week that you're asked to put in. So it's about creating an environment that was hardworking, that hopefully pushed and challenged them, but also it was enjoyable because they don't get paid. And as I said before, there's different motivations for playing. Someone wants to play internationally, maybe become professional. Somebody else is just doing it because their mates are there, but they're in the same team. So it's really important how you create that environment and how you still make it challenging. So they're still pushed in training, but it's fun. And also it's around how they learn. Has been a real key thing about. It's a key kind of pillar in my coaching. Is very much around decision making. So I'm definitely not a coach who will come in with a very strict game plan, for example, or systems of play. It'll be, here are some things that you can pick, and it's allowing the players to then pick their favourite, the best one for that scenario. And look, mistakes will happen. It might not always go right, but it's about that learning experience. So, yeah, if we can create an environment where it's okay, it's okay to do, for something to not go perfectly, because as you know, rugby is not a perfect sport. It's very complicated. There's so much going on that there is never a perfect game. So how do we equip the players to deal with things that maybe don't go the way they anticipated, or certain decisions that maybe they made in a game that if maybe they'd done something else, there might be a different outcome. But how do we give them the ability to do that in training that then allows them to translate it onto the pitch? But also, for me, it's about creating an environment and a culture where it's okay. It's okay for some things to go wrong, and it's okay for that. And it's about how we learn and develop and take it to that next step the next time we do it. So that's definitely something that I've really tried to bring into my one of my coaching and to the environments that I work in.
Yeah, excellent. It's, I guess, that being okay with failure and accepting that in your culture, and sort of encouraging it as well, because as you say, that's where the learnings take place. You mentioned before how sports psychology is sort of one of the sectors involved in the high performance, and an area I'm really interested in, and would like to know more about sort of how you get that involved, and as well as you're talking about sort of building your culture and being okay with making mistakes. That can be a big part that gets to players mentally when they make mistakes, how to deal with things go wrong. What's your sort of relationship with the sports psychology side involved with the team? Are you in dialogue with them often, or is it very sort of players go out with it, or do you work with them as a coach as well?
Probably all of the above. So we have a really unique experience at the university. We've got a full time head of sports psychology. So she works a lot with the coaches. So she's somebody that I will go and speak to, um, because I think it's really important as well as a coach that we have somebody that we can kind of offload to at times, or that ability for somebody else to give us a second opinion on things about how we're delivering things. We also then have a team of interns. So we have an intern who's allocated to our team. So Jess works alongside the team with group sessions around areas that more they want to work on. So what are the things that they feel they may need some assistance with throughout the year, or as things go out through the season, as the things that she's picking up on in terms of our environment that she can help with. And then, for some players, there's also individual support as well. So some of our players, especially those that are maybe trying to perform at a higher level, how we can help them with, coping with pressure, or again around that making mistakes, especially maybe in a more high pressure environment. So players who are trying to get into or in the national environment, that can be a lot more high pressure than maybe say a university box competition. So try and give them, so there's three different aspects to it. So yeah, really, really connected. And it's definitely one of the benefits of the university environment is that, like what I was saying around the coaches and how you can learn from them. Our sports psychologists also, it's a hot desk environment. We all sit in that room, and just those informal conversations can also be really useful. And we'll have a conversation, and then we'll be like, shall we arrange a meeting and unpick this a little bit more? And before an hour and a half, 2 hours into a conversation around something that started over making a cup of tea in the office.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I think as you said, it's such a benefit of that university environment where you've got all these sort of highly skilled and highly sort of intelligent people who are keen to put their knowledge into practice, and it's all just at your fingertips. It's almost just like you
Yeah.
ask the right person
Yeah.
instead of having to go out and recruit yourself. Have you got an example, or maybe a player example, for instance, where there's been work with a sports psychologist? Maybe it's something you've done in your own coaching where you've spoken to them, you've maybe had a meeting about it, you've looked at your approach and changed, or sort of made a slight alter to how you approach something, or even a player that has had a positive experience with working with a sports psychologist.
Yeah, without going into like loads of detail, like there's definitely players who when they come to university, we're very fortunate at Edinburgh that the players we get, again, who want to progress the rugby, are already pretty highly skilled. So they've come through age grade programs, they've been through club systems, and they're also very very smart. Um, the challenge sometimes that they face when they come into an environment like Edinburgh University, and more so the quality of competition they're playing on a Wednesday in Bucks, is that where they've been used to being maybe the superstar who's, as soon as they touch the ball they score 5 tries, or they're the one who's making all the tackles, or whatever it happens to be, that when they get put into an environment that's a lot more competitive and everyone's as good as them, it can be really challenging for them. So sometimes they struggle with that. So they'll come off the pitch and they'll be like, "Oh, I didn't play well." And you're like, "Well, what are you measuring it on?" And sometimes that measure is whether they scored X number of tries, whether they made all the line breaks. Whereas actually, you're like, "Yeah, but you gave that pass that meant that person scored the try, or you hit X number of rucks there. So without that, we wouldn't have secured the ball." So it's trying to get them to refocus their attention on maybe not the outcome. It's more about the process to get to it. And there's definitely been players that we've worked with, and who've worked with the sports psychology side of things around that, and just that coping with pressure, and how they can reframe, what does success look like, and what's the process, and all the things that go around it. Yeah, probably a few other examples around some players who've maybe had some tough experiences, who've then gone and worked with the sports psychology team to come back to rugby, or to fall back in love with rugby, because maybe they had experiences that they didn't cope well with, and at that point in their career, rugby was a stressor. But by sitting down talking with sports psychologists, coping mechanisms, they've now come to a place where actually rugby is one of the most important things in their life, and they love it again, and that's also a real success. Whether they go on and play for a local club or play internationally, for people to still be in love with the sport after maybe a period of falling out of love with it is still really, really exciting and pleasing.
Yeah, definitely. It's, I guess, not looking at sport as just for performance and sort of outcome and people winning all the time, but looking if people have that positive experience with sport. And it's something that there's a lot of studies that have come out as well showing about sort of early specialization in sports can cause that sort of falling out of love as you get older, because it's always been that sort of I have to perform, I have to perform. So
Yeah,
fostering again that positive relationship with sport is another benefit of being in the club.
yeah.
And I guess as you said as well, rugby is such a complex game. So expecting someone to sort of understand that, yeah, you might not score the try, but you've done so many other good things as part of learning about it and education of the game. So yeah, it sounds like a really good sort of culture or environment as well to be able to learn that. My last question, sort of about the university as well. Obviously, it's a time when people are stepping out their comfort zone, going somewhere new, but people also step up and have a chance to sort of be adults and find themselves in leadership positions. So do you have a close relationship with sort of a leadership group in the team, whether it's sort of captain, vice captain, or people within the club as well, that help sort of guide you and direct you and what they want as in the club? Or are you very just like, this is how we're going to do it, this is how I see it, and I'll put that in place for you guys?
A bit of both. A little bit around, especially around the performance element and the support services and the program is very much driven by myself. However, the we have a club committee, so I'm very a lot of dialogue with our president, vice president, and treasurer of the club, just around how the bigger piece more so than just the first 15 in the performance group. How can we make sure that the third 15 player who's just turned up on that cold Monday night for the first time still gets a great experience? So how can I help them with the coaching side of things? How can I help mentor coaches within the club? But then also, yeah, from the first, our captain or our co-captains we had this year, that we're we communicate and we see each other all the time, and the gym environment for me is a real good place to kind of have those kind of informal chats. So, I'll attend all our gym sessions, and some of the time I'll just be standing around and it looks like I'm not really doing anything. But if I can have one little conversation with somebody just to find out a little bit about how they're finding things, whether they're in the leadership group or not, I think that's really, really positive. And also, it's a little bit of a human environment as well. Was on a training night, things can become quite like we only get a certain amount of time on the pitch, so you've got to start at that time, you've got to finish at that time because you've got to be off because somebody else is about to jump on. So but the leadership groups are really important, and they can bring different fresh ideas, fresh perspectives, and obviously they're the ones that are seeing things as well. So um, I might not always pick up on everything, or I don't know that player X is feeling that way, or something's happened in their life. So that's where those leadership groups and the good relationship you have with your leaders, or even just your players is really important, because everyone looks to the head coach or the head of performance to kind of be the one to help solve all this, but it's a very big complex group of people who you see for in reality in terms of on pitch 3 hours a week, and a lot of that is spent doing rugby. So you don't necessarily always know what else is going on in their life. So to have that relationship with your leaders, with your, as I say, with your players is really important, because it just means that you can help them navigate this, as you say, this time in the life that can be new to people. It is new to people, but it can sometimes be tricky as well.
Yeah, good stuff. And I like the example as well of just being in the gym and being sort of that presence there to for someone to speak to, because as well as that, you're in sort of a relaxed state. You're not thinking about, right, what's the next thing we've got to do? Have we set up the next drill? It's You're very relaxed, so it makes it easier for players to come
Yeah,
although it may be an hour out of your or a couple hours out of your week, that could save a lot of time in the long run because you're on top of things. You know how players are getting on.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's important with that is not everyone's going to want to speak. Someone I'm not everyone's agony aunt. They're not going to come and open their heart to me in the gym. But if I've got a good enough relationship with a cohort of the team, sometimes it gets fed through them to me about things, or sometimes people, especially maybe players who aren't, you know, deemed as you're nailed on in your team. Uh, if they've got some uh, feelings or opinions about how things are happening in training or some of the practices we're doing, sometimes they won't want to speak to me like directly about it because they'll maybe think, oh well, she might not pick me because I've said that drill was rubbish, or that small sided game I didn't understand it and she didn't explain it very well. So again, that's where this relationship with your team's really important because sometimes some of it will get fed back and be like, oh, four people came to us and said that they didn't really enjoy that, or you know, this is happening, or whatever it is, and then I can go away and think about it and reflect action if need be. But that's why I say I think it's really important that you have this communication channel. It doesn't have to be direct. It can be via somebody else, by your captains who will then come and speak to me on behalf of the team.
Yeah, excellent. It reminds me a wee bit. You hear the sort of podcasts and old stories about like England teams and how players would like try and avoid the head coaches and managers because they know if we have to chat to them, then they'll probably be getting dropped. So just try and avoid them at all costs. Yeah, better stay confused and not ask anything.
Yeah.
Awesome, good stuff. I'd like to move on a wee bit now as well about sort of your time coaching the Sweden Women's International 15 sevens team. Obviously, a wee bit different to still rugby coaching, but a wee bit different to your previous experiences in Scotland and the UK. So, first, could you just sort of explain how you found yourself, or you're no longer in this role, but spent a few years in it, how you found yourself sort of in this role and why you were keen for applying for it?
Yeah, it was a bit of a kind of an accident. I my assistant coach at Edinburgh University used to work in coach development within Scottish Rugby, and he's got contacts around Europe, and he knew somebody from Sweden. He'd been across a couple of times and done some coach development, and Neil, the general manager over in Sweden, had asked if he would come over and help run an open camp. But he couldn't make it that weekend, so he was like, "Do you fancy it?" And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds pretty cool." Sweden in July, of course, yeah. I'll head over. So I headed over, and just had a real great experience with a group of players who were totally committed to what we were doing. We're having fun. And at the end of that, I was just like, look, if there's anything else, like any other things like this, I'd love to come back over. I had a really great time. And then maybe like 2 months later, the head coach role appeared. So I applied and was successful, and I had about, I think it was about three and a half, maybe 4 years in role. A lot of that over COVID, so that was challenging. But yeah, that's how I ended up getting into that. And at the time, I wasn't doing any age grade coaching in Scotland anymore. I'd kind of stepped back from that to focus on a couple of other things, and I really wasn't planning on going into like any sort of international coaching. But it was just something that it just kind of sparked an interest. It was a nation who maybe weren't at they're not at the top table. So it was an exciting time, and there was so much potential from that one camp that it just excited me. So yeah, that's how I applied, and that's how I ended up going back and forth from Edinburgh to mainly Stockholm quite a lot.
Yeah, definitely get your air miles up. I guess it was almost an opportunity. Yeah, as you say, that spark and sort of too good to say no. You don't want to regret that chance that comes up. As you mentioned, a fair chunk of that time was during COVID. But when you sort of started the role and first got into it, what were the initial challenges that you saw, but also the opportunities when you started that role, and how did you approach both the challenges and the opportunities that came with it?
Yeah, and the first time I actually met the majority of the national team was the night before an international. So, there's a big challenge in itself. You've been handed 23 players. You have no idea who anyone is. I had to sit down with the captain the night before and basically go through the team and be like, right, names. Okay, how do I pronounce some of these names to start with? And what position does she play? What type of player is she? So I was painting a picture of players that I had no footage. There was nothing. It was literally a list of names on a piece of paper. So that was obviously a huge challenge. But we ended up. I think we won the first game if I remember rightly. Um, but you could just see that there was just so much athletic potential in terms of here's a group of women who had come from, and not all, but a lot of them had started playing rugby quite late on. So, they had all these athletic skills from playing handball, from playing American football, from playing ice hockey, that could easily be transferred into rugby. Um, so there's like a huge window of opportunity there to take a group of females who had that athletic potential, who just maybe didn't understand rugby, or hadn't played it that much, or the level of experience that they were able to get from their clubs was different to what it would be in the UK because rugby is such a more developed sport over here. So there was just a real, yeah, there's a real sort of opportunity there to go, well, actually they're doing all right considering they haven't played international rugby, and I think at that point it was 3 years. Um, they haven't really done much, and actually there's some real potential here, and I think we can get this group of players, and there's more out there that we can turn into a really good international team, and that was always my intention was to try and get the team into the championship for 15s, which is obviously the one division below Six Nations, which was super exciting to do. And the same with the Sevens program. They were very separate. And how can you utilise the experience in both those squads to maximise the benefit to Sevens and 15s? And that was definitely something that we worked hard on to try and align the two programs. Obviously, there's pinch points, and at certain points in the season, someone will focus on sevens, and someone else might focus on 15s. But how could we make sure that um, when you've got such a small pool of players that you can you can have the benefit to both programs without overstretching the players, because that's always the challenge. The seventh season is when the 15th season isn't, and vice versa. So someone who plays both, it's a long year, and there's a lot of pressure on them financially, because from a Swedish perspective, the level of funding is not what we see in the Six Nations teams or Scotland, for example. So the a lot of the program, their camps, their competitions, their travel is self funded. So we need to factor that in as well. We could put this plan in place to have this brilliant international program, but if the players couldn't afford to get there, it's pointless.
Yeah. You've covered a huge amount there and sort of half answered a few of my next questions, which was good. But
Sorry, yeah.
no, it's good. I can dive into them a wee bit more. Um, I think, as you said, the difference between the seasons is something it's easy to forget if you're not sort of used to have learnt about sort of Scandinavian sport culture, where equally with a football season they play throughout the summer and then their rest is through the winter, and then the 15's club season is through the summer, whereas that's normally just 7 seasons over here. So that's quite a big adaptation, as you said. Additionally, with the culture, I quite like to ask about this. You said about sort of learning player names. I worked at like an international summer school last year where it was kids from sort of all around Europe and the world, and 3 weeks with them, and I'm still struggling with some of the names by the end of it. So to learn all 23 the night before just sounds like you won't sleep, be a bit of a nightmare. So did you have to sort of adapt maybe your language or how you operated with things, maybe to do with facilities or your approach to coaching, because of the differences in the culture there, whether it's to do simply with the weather or how sort of Swedish culture maybe may see things differently?
Yeah, I think you probably hit it there with like the weather, and the seasons. Their rugby season is very short, so their 15 season will start uh, in the summer, towards the end of the summer, and run through until about October time. Because then, from October, November, right way through to about April, they just can't go outside. Well, they can go outside, but it's cold. The grass pitches aren't playable. So there was that. That was definitely something that as a coach, I had to learn and adapt to. So we're trying to prepare players to play international rugby in potentially February, March, but they can't get outside and play rugby essentially between October and March, April. So we had to kind of change a few things. I had to learn how to adapt to what facilities we had. So there was definitely times where we had to train indoors. So we'd have a couple of handball courts, which is fine. We can do a lot of handling and a lot of practice in there, and then get access to wrestling facilities as well. So what type of contact can we do to again make sure these players are ready to play international rugby in their off season when we can't get outside, so we can't do live contact. So that was definitely a big challenge and learning. I had to become a much more skillful coach to to come up with practices that um, you could do in a wrestling facility because I was never used to do that. I never coached in a wrestling facility. It's not that big as well, and you've got 25, 30 players in there, and you're having to adapt to make sure yes, we've got this padded area, but there's still a brick wall on the side there, so we can't run into that. So yeah, definitely a real challenge. From a cultural perspective in terms of the what I loved around being involved with Sweden was they they just want to work hard. So as a coach, they were very very easy to coach because they when you explain something, they wanted to do it and they wanted to do it to the best of their ability. And everything was always 100%, always 110%. So it's that Swedish culture about hard working and doing everything to the best of your ability was brilliant as a coach because it made my job so much easier. And when you only have a short space of time together, we would go over for a weekend. Um, to have that buy-in from the players that they were going to work hard, when we asked them to, and they were always going to work to the best of their ability, just made everything. It made it really worthwhile because we've all probably been in sessions or camps where you get to the end of it and like, oh, that just wasn't really. I didn't maybe coach as
Mhm.
well, or the players weren't bought into it, or there was a flat today, which we never really got. So yeah, it's that hard working environment and culture that comes from their Swedish culture. It was brilliant to work with.
Yeah, awesome. And it's often you hear the role of a coach is to be a motivator as well, but that can take a lot of your energy and a lot of your thought away from what you actually want to do with the skill stuff. So being able to sort of walk in knowing that you're going to get that motivation commitment straight away, and you've just got to get the technical stuff sort of spot on,
Yeah,
can be really helpful. And I like it as well. You may be going into this role thinking, right, I've got all this experience. It'll just be putting it in another sort of environment. But no, you're stuck inside in a small wrestling hall. How can you adapt and evolve as a coach? And have you been able to take sort of some of those lessons and learnings and put it into your context here in Scotland again?
yeah. I haven't done it on a practical level, but it's definitely something as the game, and especially with the university program and potentially like Edinburgh Rugby in terms of where that could go. And you need to try and think differently. Everything doesn't need to be on a pitch all the time, and how can you get like small-sided, small unit skills? So a breakdown area that can be in a wrestling facility and a judo hall. So how can we utilize spaces, especially at the university that we're fortunate to have? It doesn't mean we have to always be outside on the grass. And again, Scottish weather can sometimes be quite miserable. December in at Peffermill in Edinburgh is sometimes not the most fun place to be, but indoor sports hall we can get as much done there in a small group sense. So there's definitely things that I think I could and probably should use a little bit more than what I currently do.
Awesome, excellent. And just to sort of conclude on the Sweden area, you talked about the sort of aim of getting into the championship, which you were successful with. What was your favorite role, or sorry, favorite memory in this role? If you've got sort of one standout one, whether it's 15s or sevens, that one time where it just sort of sticks with you.
It was probably that last sort of spring into summer, and there's probably a 15s one and the sevens one. So, um, 15s wise, we come off the back of COVID. I hadn't been across for I think about a year and a half, and we had to try and prepare for that international program, and we had no real idea what was going to happen. I had exemptions to get in and out of Sweden at certain points when COVID was on, so I was, I guess, one of the lucky people who was still able to travel a little bit, but that put pressure on our training environment because obviously, as it was in the UK, there were certain things we could do and certain things we couldn't do. So when we set our targets on, performing well at that European trophy that next year, I think that was a real highlight was to come through that program and win all our games and get promoted. That game in Switzerland to win promotion was brilliant. And then from a sevens perspective, I think that that year, so I only had one season with the sevens, but again we managed to get promoted from the trophy into the championship. And the year that we played, because of the Olympics and the Olympic qualification, certain teams hadn't played the year before, or a GB team had played as opposed to an England team. So within the trophy, there was teams that were or had been or were going, you know, well, England were in it, Italy were in it, Portugal. So some real quality teams. So for us as a squad to get the opportunity to play against England, and at the time, and if you look at some of the GB players that are playing now, hopefully going to Paris, um, a lot of those players were playing for that England team, and we had the opportunity to play against England across the two legs of the tournament, and we got probably learnt some lessons. But it was the fight and the determination for the girls to go, right, well, actually, I think we can be as good as them in this area, or um, whatever it was. And then we ended up, first leg we finished fourth, and then the second leg we finished third, which allowed us to get promoted, allowed us to go to World Cup qualification, Olympic qualification, as well. So all these opportunities that came from that. So that whole summer was just brilliant in terms of the progression from start to finish and getting that promotion to the championship where, I said at the start, I think Sweden deserve to be and have the ability to be at.
Yeah, amazing. And I guess it comes off a few years of some really difficult times and frustrating times with COVID, but putting that hard work in, staying consistent with it, and then getting rewards at the end, which is brilliant to hear.
Yeah.
Awesome, amazing. Right, we'll move on to sort of the final area that I'd like to ask you about, which is the recent success with Edinburgh that you've had in a new role, as well as working with the national setups as well. So the youth ones with Scotland, but also the World Cup, which I'd like to ask you about first. So I think about 18 months ago now, you had the chance to go down under to New Zealand with the senior women's international side for Scotland. What was that experience like, firstly? Because it sounds a bit of a dream.
Yeah, it was cool. So every team had to have an intern. So it was a female coach within their setup. Scotland were the last team to qualify for the World Cup, so I was brought on like really late. Some of the other people, and obviously the World Cup got delayed by a year as well. So some of the other female coaches have been involved in their environments for about 3 years. I joined in, I think it was about April time, so it was around about Six Nations of 2022, and then went through with the program all summer, and then into the World Cup in New Zealand. So it was amazing, like to go into that environment. The players had just recently gone full time as well. So we were in a full time environment, and that summer was hard work, but it was really enjoyable because got to experience what a full time training environment, especially at international level, can look like. And then, being out in New Zealand, the World Cup out there, I think probably we'll look back in a few years and be like, that was a bit of a watershed moment for the women's game. Lucky enough to experience great crowds with Scotland. Unfortunately, Scotland didn't progress past the group stages, but I then stayed on for 3 weeks afterwards with World Rugby as part of the internship. So we got to shadow operations, we got to go to High Performance Sport New Zealand, and we got to experience, all the quarterfinals, semi-finals, then ultimately the final out at Eden Park, which was just, it's probably one of the highlights of my career in terms of like a rugby game that was just up there. It was a brilliant game, and the atmosphere was excellent. So yeah, it was a real cool and unique experience. And I also got to meet some pretty inspirational and cool women from around the world who were still connected, who were obviously in my position and in different unions.
Amazing. Yeah, it sounds just incredible, and to be at that final as well. Up there with one of the best in any sport. I'd say England going in as massive favourites, and for it to go down to the wire and finish like that. Um, how did you? So you were coming into this environment. I'm sure you were sort of familiar with a lot of the players. You've been involved in rugby for a long time. But did it take a while for you to sort of make your impact, make your mark? Did you approach it and sort of learn first, listen first to the environment, and then sort of putting your footprint on things, or were you very just the coaches were like, "Come in, Claire, you know what you're doing. We want you to take this. We want you to lead back. Get stuck in." How did you sort of approach the opportunity?
Yes, probably a bit of both. I was lucky enough that a lot of the players I'd either worked with previously through some of my other roles, or knew them again just through coaching. So it made it very easy for me to come in. It wasn't like I was going into a completely new group of people. I knew a lot of them. I'd also had a fair bit of interaction with the coaches within the national programme, whether that was just observing sessions or as such. So yeah, I was probably in a real fortunate position that I didn't really need to get to know anybody. I kind of knew people already, so it was a case of finding out what the coaches would want from me. Uh, where can I be of value to them, and kind of probably taking a little bit of a slower approach to start with. So, you know, rather than I came in and led things to start with, it was more right. Here's the practice we're going to do. Can you just look for these two things, or can you run this little one here? Or for me, it was more about that individual feedback. So if I maybe wasn't as directly involved with delivering, what could I see, and could I have those little conversations with players who I know, who I trust and respect, and hopefully vice versa, that just allowed me to add a little bit of value to the program. It was probably also quite an interesting time because the summer, the majority of the training to start with was done predominantly with the forwards, because Scotland had qualified for the Commonwealth Games that summer. So essentially all the backs were doing Commonwealth Games. So for the first month, maybe 2 months, it was basically the forwards. So, and I've probably coached more with the backs. That's my specialty. So it was actually really, I think it was actually really valuable because it allowed me to spend time with a group of people that maybe if it had been the whole squad, I might not have interacted with as much, either from a coaching perspective or even just from a group dynamics, because I probably would have gravitated either to the backs or to the people that I already know. So I think it actually, hindsight looking back, it probably helped, even though at times I was like, well, I'm not quite sure what we're doing here. We're doing line out sessions, and I'm like completely like, bamboozling me. But it definitely helped my learning, and I definitely say I developed a lot in areas that would definitely not be my specialty. I'm still not an expert, but I definitely have a lot more appreciation and understanding of aspects of the game, especially forwards play, that I did not have 2 years ago.
Yeah, excellent. it does sound a bit daunting coming in and then right. I've not worked much with forwards, but on you go and see what you can add. And yeah, I think from my own experience as well, sometimes being in that position where you're not working maybe where your speciality is, it's maybe trying to look at things from a different angle and from your
Yeah.
perspective and what you know, and what little tweaks or skills have you done in the past but maybe relevant and transferable here. So yeah, but that sounds brilliant. um as well, as well as sort of having that experience, you've been involved in the youth setups with the women's side, both for Thistle, sorry, and the futures, which is sort of the under 20s,
Yeah.
and bringing through that next generation. Um, how's that been? How have those experiences been, and what's it like working with that younger sort of group of players, similar to university?
Yeah, it's an area that I really enjoy working with. Which is probably why I've spent so long at the university. I find it a real, um, just a great age group and stage of their development to work with. Um, the benefit we've had last year's Thistles and the Celtic Challenge was a lot of players who were in that kind of under 20, under 23 age group. Um, so by doing that and then moving into the Scotland Senior Futures, which was essentially under 23s, it allowed us to work with that group for a quite a sustained period of time. So we went through December, right the way through Celtic to February. Then we had a spring under 20s program, under 20 plus program, and then we went to Italy for a Tri Nations in July. So we had a real sustained period with that group, and yeah, it's an age group that are they want to learn, and it's about how we can help prepare them, especially at the under 23s or under 20 level. How can we give them the skills, the knowledge, so that if and when they get selected into that senior environment, it's not too daunting, because we've given them the performance behaviours, the expectations, what it's like to be in camp, what it's like to travel with a team, which are things, without the Celtic Challenge and this age group program, some players have never experienced that before. So they were getting called into a residential camp with the national team, but they didn't know how to behave, what to do, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. Um, Traveling for a game, going away, roommates, things like that. All these little things that you now can get experience with through Celtic Challenge or age grade rugby will prepare players better for going into that environment away from the rugby side of things.
Yeah, awesome. And I guess as well, it's that pathway as well. And for a young, maybe 15, 16-year-old player at a club who a number of years ago might have just seen it sort of this, and then maybe one day I'll get to play international.
Yeah.
Whereas now they can see the steps they need to take and the processes that are in there to hopefully encourage them and help them to get to that stage.
uh, Previously, before there wasn't that pathway. It was very much you play for your club and then you hopefully get picked up for the international team. Now there's under 16 Scotland under 16 girls, under 18 girls are playing today down in the under 18s festival. You've now got under 20s, you've got Celtic Challenge, so you've got these stepping stones that a young female rugby player can now aspire to get on, and people will come off the pathway and come back onto it, or they might jump on later on or whatever it is. Everyone's path will be slightly different, but there's now a pathway, whereas previously, it definitely wasn't there, and there wasn't the infrastructure around it and the support from Scottish Rugby to help build this momentum underneath, which is fueling the national team at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking about that infrastructure, just the start of this year, you were given the role of head coach with Edinburgh Women's Rugby, the first time that both Edinburgh and Glasgow have had a first sort of women's side. Um, that's obviously a new role. You're sort of creating history for women's rugby in Scotland. One of my questions around that is you've got players coming from lots of different of clubs or universities
Yeah.
across Scotland. Many of them will play together, will know together, maybe have been through those age grades together. But how do you bring all those different people together to create a team in a time where you didn't have much time together or beforehand to do that? So how do you form that sort of idea of we're Edinburgh Rugby, we're a team now, we're going to go play together. Whereas, they're still playing against each other in the Premiership and things like that. So how do you do that in such a short space of time?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. The way I like to approach it is to sit down and find out what players want from the program to start with, and get them to share their experiences. So, what do they want? What do they want from this? Is it just the t-shirt, or actually is it to improve my rugby, and what do they want it to feel like? So what does it feel for them to feel comfortable in this environment? How do they want us to communicate with them as coaches, as management? And then to come up with our own set of kind of standards, behaviours, values that we've all agreed, or predominantly the players have agreed. um, and then one of the things that we did was around getting them to speak to each other about it. So I had a real cheesy, like one of those spin wheels, and one of our post-training session meetings was basically, it's kind of like a bit like speed dating. You had an inner circle and an outer circle, spun the wheel, and it would ask, what does success look like to you? I'd speak to you. Next one I'd move round, wheel would spin again. What does high performing environment look like to you? So then they started to speak to each other, and give each other their own perspective on it. So it was just about trying to force them together, and maybe again speak to people that they wouldn't necessarily gravitate towards naturally, because we all do it. That environment, you've got X number from this club, Y number from that club. These guys have all played age grade. These X, this group here haven't been involved before. So how can we get them integrated so they get to know about everybody? And there were some random questions in there, like, what's your favourite colour? Do you have any siblings? Two truths and a lie, things like that. So again, you get a bit of humour, and gets a bit more humanised about what that person's like. And then it's just getting down to work on the pitch, and creating that environment, like I spoke about earlier, that's hardworking, that's fun, but all the time we then draw back to our values. What did we say we were going to do? We said it was going to be X and Y. Okay, are we upholding them, and come back to them quite frequently? So yeah, it probably one of the real positives and benefits of the initial start of the program was that first chunk was over Christmas and New Year. So normally everybody's having to work, go to uni, whatever it happens to be. But because we had like a 2 week window where we had some camps during the day, but it was Christmas and New Year, so everybody could focus on their rugby. So it wasn't like you're rushing in from work, sorry I'm late, my lecture overran, things like that. It was just like, right, we're here. And it was quite a nice break for everybody over Christmas to get away, run around for a few hours, go back to the family, and enjoy the festivities. But I think that was actually really valuable, something that we really hadn't thought about before we started the program. Just we as staff and they as players could essentially be Edinburgh Rugby full-time players during that small window, which allowed us to, I think, bond pretty quickly, because yeah, everyone could just put their eggs into that basket at that time.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, what would typically be a time where people are sort of wanting to switch off from everything, I guess, is a perfect time to do some rugby and get the hard work
Yeah,
done. And I like how you talk about that sort of coming back to the values, but also the co-creation, I guess, is of with players. So it's what do you guys want it to be, and then when things are going maybe not quite as you want it, you can come back to that and be like, this is what we agreed with, this is what you guys wanted to achieve. So if you don't want to do that anymore, then we can't continue. But that's sort of on you guys. So, and I
yeah,
think that's really important in any environment. Obviously, you had a lot of success. I think finishing second in the league.
yeah.
So amazing for a first year as a team together. What was maybe one thing you would take away from that experience that maybe you might do differently, or a learning that you might change in how you do things going forward if you're in this role again, and maybe something that looking back you might have done or changed slightly.
I don't know how much I would change. Yeah, look, there's definitely things you could change with infrastructure. more time with players, but that's a hard one to get when people are not full time. Um, I, I probably wouldn't. I'm quite clear on my philosophy as a coach. I'm quite clear that I want to create a decision making environment that it won't be overly structured. So a lot of our training is very much games based. It's small sided games. It's problem solving, and if I was to do it again, I'd probably do the exact same thing. I would change how we maybe ran some of those sessions, but I don't think from an overall perspective there's too much I would change. I believe that the way that the program was to run, the way that my philosophy as a coach, I think it helps players in the long run, and we could probably, if we're looking at it from you know, everyone will look back to the second Wolfhounds game. We were comfortably winning that game. Um, they scored 14 points in essentially 4 minutes to draw. Now, on face value, straight after the game, we're pretty annoyed, pretty frustrated, pretty disappointed with that. But then when you start to look at it from a learning experience, um, the players, yeah, and coaches, we recognise that we'd probably never been in such a high pressure situation before in our coaching or playing careers. We'd never had a team that just like spotted that something wasn't quite right with us, and they turned the throttle. They had numerous international players, and we looked at that as a group, and from a coaching perspective, we looked at how we influenced the game in terms of our messages, how we maybe looked at our substitutions and things like that. And yeah, there's probably things there we might not do again. But again, from a playing perspective, that in how could they manage that differently if that situation rose ever again in the rugby career? And one of the things that they said was that, yeah, it was a hard lesson, but they definitely learned from it, and they learned how they could manage that differently next time. And the outcome might not be any different because the Wolfhounds were ruthless. But how could we control that and manage the momentum in that game a little bit better? So that's probably going back to your question around learning and something different. It's probably it gave me some skills and experience that I again couldn't get from uh, my current club environment. We play rolling subs, for example. This was not rolling subs, so there's that additional pressure. So I definitely learned a lot around myself as a coach and how I can, maybe make decisions slightly differently, to hopefully help the players. So yeah, it's a bit of a. I don't think there's much about the program, but more around maybe some of the decision making and how we help the players reach certain points.
Yeah, excellent. I guess it is quite a tough question when you've had such a good season. I mean, it's like forget the good things. What are things we can get better? So yeah, but it's a good example and a good thing to think about. Look, Claire, you've given an incredible insight into so much so far. So thank you for that. Just one last question to finish on, and it's maybe taking a step back and looking at the whole picture of women's rugby. It's grown incredibly quickly over the last sort of number of years, especially after COVID, as you say. The World Cup in about 18 months ago, a huge part of that as well. Scotland are playing France tomorrow. Scotland women's playing France, and I believe almost is it set for a record breaking crowd at home for
Yeah,
Scotland.
I believe
So
so.
that's just
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So just reflective of the speed it's growing at. So it may be a bit of a big question to ask, but how do you see the next steps of the future of women's rugby, both in Scotland and globally? Maybe in the next 5 years, 10 years. Obviously, we've got the World Cup again in 2 years, so just a 3 year cycle, which
Yeah.
maybe isn't great, but it could be a good thing in this case because it's got so much momentum, so it could help it. So, where do you see it going? What do you see the next few years looking like?
Yeah, I think from a Scottish perspective, the addition of the Celtic Challenge for the Scots, Welsh, and Irish has been a brilliant competition, and I would like to see that that grow, number of games. So hopefully, there's more competitive games. The players that are now starting to come through that programme into international teams, not just for Scotland, but Ireland and Wales as well, is hopefully proof that competition is providing that pathway that's been sought after. We're now in a fortunate position where a lot of the top 10 teams or 8 teams in the world are now professional or semi-professional. How can we commercialize the game even more so that, it's not just international players that are professional? How can an Edinburgh Rugby or a Glasgow Warriors, from a Scottish perspective, how can they have squads of 30, 40 players who are full-time professional female rugby players? That would be brilliant. And I think the 3 year cycle from the World Cup actually could work in the favour. The fact it's in England as well. They've got they're out to win that one. Of course they are, and the crowds that are now starting to flock to all Six Nations matches are huge. As you said, Scotland due to have a record crowd tomorrow, which I believe will likely be smashed again in 2 weeks' time, when England come to play. And England filled Twickenham with, was it 45, 50,000 people last year, and I think they've already said they've sold 30,000 for the game this year. And if you just look at how women's football, again, on the back of the Euros, the World Cup, club teams in England are selling out big stadiums, selling out 75,000 stadiums for, I'm not totally sure which teams, but an Arsenal, Chelsea, things like that. So, I think women's rugby is definitely a cusp. I think there's some really exciting opportunities, and I think we'll look back in 5 years' time, over the last 2, 3 years, and be like, wow, that was a real turning point for women's rugby in across the world, not just in the UK.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more. And I think one of the best ways I saw it described was like, you've got 50% of the world's population that you're sort of ignoring in a way at the moment with their level of sport. So put a bit of backing into this, and you'll see the amount of commercial opportunity that's there that you can take advantage of. So yeah, it's brilliant, and it's exciting to see, and I'm sure you're going to be a big part of that in Scotland as well. So yeah. Awesome. Right, Claire, I would like to say again a massive thank you for all your time. I've got a huge amount out from this, sort of learning about how it works in Edinburgh, and also your story and your experiences. So a massive thank you for everything.
No, not at all. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.